there isn't a more important skill than decision making. And if you're not good at it, all you got to do is start making some decisions. What would you, my question would be, instead of just listening to us today, if nothing else came out of this, what's one little decision you could make that would increase the quality of your life that honestly you should make? Maybe you've been putting it off because it's inconvenient, you've got lots of other stressful things in your life, or you're not really comfortable. But if you're really committed and you follow through, you just decided, committed, and followed through, right, resolved, where would you be a year from now? What would your life be like? And I would take a little decision, and what action would you take today? Make that decision now. And then if you're bold, what's a big decision? What's a tough decision? What's a decision you've been putting off, or in your gut it's right, but, it might be about a relationship. It might be about how you're dealing with your kids. It might be around your career or your business or your finances. But that's how life gets better. That's how you start creating life as opposed to being a manager of circumstance. And I think when people are maintaining, when they're managing their circumstances, when they're surviving, they're miserable. Like, we are made to grow and we're made to give. When we grow, we have more to give. And so I think decision-making is the pathway, one of them certainly, to getting there. You know what the biggest problem is that people have? They think they're not supposed to have them. Problems are a sign of life. I remember I interviewed, what was his name? Norman Vincent Peale, Dr. Peale, who wrote the original Power of Positive Thinking book. When I was 32, he was 92, and he invited me, because my career was growing, invited me up to Toronto to meet him at an event he was doing. So I came backstage and we spent about an hour in advance. And I remember asking him, I said, I'm curious. I said, why are you still doing these events? And he goes, well, Tony, there's still a few negative people around here. At 92. I said, what's the most, and think about 92, he's men's horse and carriage to rockets, right? Nothing to computers, right? Just the changes in his lifetime were just unbelievable. And I said, what do you think is the most important thing people need to understand? And he said, the power of problems. And I said, what do you mean by that? He goes, well, the only people without problems are in cemeteries. And I said, I think I heard that somewhere. He said, in 1947, I said that. He said, but they never finished my quote. I said, the only people without problems are in cemeteries. So if you don't have any, you better go on your knees and pray for some. Because he said, problems are a sign of life. And what I found is problems call us. He said he was sitting one time at this dais. He was at a speaking dais, and it was like a luncheon. And beside him was the heavyweight champion of the world. It was back in the 40s, right? And he said that, he looked at him, his name was Gene Tunney, he's a pretty famous guy. And he said, Gene, how do you get muscles like that? And Gene said, do you really want to know, or are you just asking? And he said, and he told me in his head, he goes, I was thinking, I was just asking, but now I really want to know, because he was so intense about it. He says, no, I really want to know. He goes, every day I push against unbelievable resistance, and that's what sculpts these muscles, right? That's how you build muscle. And he said, I thought about it a long time afterwards, and he said, I think that's how we develop spiritually. We push against problems, and that's what sculpts our souls. And so I think to think you shouldn't have problems, you can call them challenges, it feels better, but it's part of life, it's part of the journey. And solving them makes you bigger, more alive, more spiritually developed, more human, more caring. Pain and suffering, you don't have to suffer long, but we're all gonna experience some of it, right? But decision-making is how we get out of it. I have a 6-step process, and if people want to jot it down, I call it OOCEMR. Those are the trigger letters for what I do, OOCEMR. And I developed this years ago because I only had one business. Now, I'm fortunate enough, I have 114 companies. We do over $10 billion in business. I have no business background, all decision-making, learning skills, et cetera. But way back then when I had a small business, these decisions were just, it was tough. They were important decisions. They felt like they were life and death decisions for the business. And I knew that knowing how smart I am, you're better with a group of people around you. Because even if you have more information, they have another perspective, And so I was trying to find a decision-making model, and I thought, well, all decision-making is really value clarification. Like, what's most important to you? Like, what you decide, what someone else decide may be different, but may be right. Because it's about what do you value most, right? So I thought, I should start with decision-making, not by all the emotion that I may have of either anxiety or fear or excitement or passion. Either one can lead you astray. It's like, what do I want? What's the outcome? That's the first O. So I get people, and by the way, I tell people, do not do this in your head. The reason people get overwhelmed is they ask multiple questions too fast to answer that. It's like, what am I gonna do? I don't know what to do. What if she says this? What if he did that? But what if it doesn't do that? And you're asking 20 questions and you don't have the processing power to answer them, so you're just going to overwhelm. Slow it down,
Write this
one
down.
thing at a time, right? But start not with what you're afraid of, start with what you want. because that's how the human nervous system is designed. It's designed to make things happen, to create. So if you become a creator, you start with the why. So what are your outcomes? And this is the reason it's hard to make decisions for most people is they have multiple outcomes they're trying to get from the same decision, right? They want to make everybody happy, and they want to make $1 million, and they want to have more free time, and, all simultaneously. So you have to say, which of those things is most important to you? Is it the free time? Is it the family time? Is it to make more money? Is it, you have to decide what's most important for you, right? So I have people write down their outcomes, and they're usually if they're having a hard time, it's because there's multiple outcomes. And then I also say, don't ever do this in your head, because you can't manage it all in your head. Picture's worth 1,000 words. So you write down the outcomes, and then you put them in order. And then you put the why, because the why is what matters. Like, what is the reason? What's the emotion behind this? What is it even though I say this is what I want, what do I want out of this? What's it going to give me? It's going to give me joy. It's going to be happiness, fulfillment, spiritual development. What is it, right? So now when you're crystal clear what you want and the order you want it in, and that's critical. What's number one? You got to be rigorous. Now you can make decisions by going to second, what are your options? And I always tell people one option is no option. 2 options is dilemma. You need at least 3 choices to be a choice, right? And when you get to 3, you usually find there's 4 or 5. Now, you may not like them all, but you shouldn't lie to yourself and say, this is the only option. That'll stress you out. Or these 2 are the only option, you'll get stuck in a dilemma. So I write out all the options. Then I go to OOC is consequences, which is what you're doing the decisions for. What's the upside and the downside of each of these decisions to the best of my knowledge? The upside could be this and this, the downside could be that and that. I've considered the first half. Okay. Now you know what exactly you want, you know what your options are, and you know upsides and downsides of each. So now we're going to go into the last 3 stages. I'm going to evaluate, mitigate, and resolve. Evaluate. Now I'm going to evaluate what's the probability of those consequences. Because you might have something that's like, oh my God, if this happens, it's the worst thing on earth, but the probability is next to 0 and you're all stressed out. Unless you evaluate probability, you're wasting your time. You might have some go, oh my God, if this works out, it's gonna be the greatest thing in the history of the world, but the likelihood of happening is 0, right? You can't let those extremes get you. So you start to see by evaluating what's there. And then the last 2 steps are fast. It's mitigation. Mitigation means, okay, I've seen what I want. I know my options. I know the upside down. I know what's probable. Now, could I take something from this option and mix it with this one? Is there a way to mitigate the downsides? And almost always there are. And at this stage, your brain gets really creative because it's not in fear or uncertainty or anxiety, because you're not in your head, it's right in front of you. And the last part is resolve. And I gave you a million stories, it was too late to do, but I can just tell you, I've made personally $400 million from one decision I made from this personally. I'm trying to give you an economic piece. What the spiritual, emotional value has been on things is priceless. And I can honestly tell you by using this system, I'm writing this book right now called The Power of Decision, because I want people to have that skill. And I show them everybody, Bezos' decision-making skills. I teach people everybody's format, but this is my format for doing it. And I found it to be incredibly valuable, especially when you add commit, resolve, to it, not just decide to the process. So I hope that's helpful for people.
We don't experience life. We experience the life we focus on. In every moment, what's wrong is always available, so is what's right. And it's not positive thinking, it's about intelligence. If you're in a lousy state, you don't treat people better, you don't perform better, you're obviously not happier. So what we teach people is how to shift their focus, how to determine what values at this stage of your life are the ones that are most important to you, that will pull you towards what you want. I always look at motivation, and I don't like the word motivation, but people overuse it, so I might as well use it, because I'm not a motivator, I'm a strategist, but I also believe in the power of inspiring people, obviously, and having high energy. But there's 2 types of motivation. There's push motivation, as I'm sure you know. That's where you're using willpower and making yourself do it. And Jordan, you have an enormous amount of willpower. My respect for you is through the roof, all that you've dealt with and all that you've done. And it's helped shape who you are, because you haven't given up and moved forward. But there is a limit to willpower. I got a lot of willpower too. So, but there's no limit to pull motivation. Pull motivation is where something that you care about more than yourself, something that's a magnificent obsession, something where you're contributing. It could be your kids, it could be your family, but all that ties to the aim of your values that move you forward. And so we have a 6-day process I do called Date with Destiny. So how does that relate to the study? Well, 2 professors, as I understand it, we were approached by Stanford, and they said 2 of our professors had come here, they were clinically depressed, and they're off medication, and all they did was go to this 6-day program. We don't understand it. Do you have data on this? And I said, sure, I've got millions of testimonials. And somebody said, no, scientific data. I said, no, that's not been my focus. My focus is just get results for people. But if you want to do one, I'm open to it. what would you like to study? And they said, well, right now is the middle of COVID. And they said, depression is through the roof, suicide's through the roof, overdoses are through the roof. I said, I know. And they said, we'd love to test this non-pharmacological approach to it that you have and see what it really produces, because this seems miraculous. And I said, well, it's not miraculous. It's just rewiring the way in which people perceive their world. If I'm going to go do the Dakar race where I'm going to go, 9,000 miles to the Sahara Desert, you can't take the car you're currently running and expect it, you're going to die in the desert. You need to have that car re-engineered. So for example, the exhaust can get above the sand. Well, we help people re-engineer, and we don't tell them what to do. We show them how to re-engineer themselves so they have their own autonomy and ownership. And I said, but tell me something, if we're going to study this, what do the meta studies show? And the meta studies show that they said that 60% of the people who come for treatment, whether it's drugs or therapy or both, 60% make no improvement. That's the average. 40% improve overall. The average improvement is 50%. So I said, so they're half as depressed as they were? They said, yes, some people get well, but most people are on drugs for the rest of their lives. And I said, you could almost do that with a placebo. And the guy had a nervous laugh and he said, well, yeah, maybe. I said, I'm sure it sounds like hubris, but I said, just based on history, I'm sure we'll do better than that. I said, what's the best study of all psychiatry you've ever seen in terms of wiping out these symptoms? And at the time, they said there was a study done at Johns Hopkins, you're probably familiar with it, 5 years ago, where for a month, they gave people psilocybin, magic mushrooms, and cognitive therapy. And they said the results were the greatest in the history of psychiatry. At the end of 6 weeks, was their evaluation, that group had 54% of the people had no symptoms whatsoever of depression. I said, well, that's a great standard. I said, I'd like to see us beat that. I said, again, it doesn't sounds like hubris. It sounds like maybe arrogance. I'm not coming from that place. I just think our numbers will be significantly higher, but we'll see. You designed the program. So they designed it, and as you said, they had a separate group that was just like they did for Johns Hopkins, test group that didn't have my work. They had gratitude journaling. They did various other things. And the results were beyond their imagination. At the end of 6 weeks, after just going through a seminar, no drugs, no one-on-one therapy, just the rewiring for themselves, 93% of them had no symptoms whatsoever. It's nothing like it has ever been done. And 7% of the people still improved, but they didn't completely eliminate their symptoms. But here's the best part. 19% came in with suicidal ideation, 0 suicidal ideation afterwards, which is what I've seen over and over the decades. So they followed up a year later and they found 52% increase in positive emotions, 71% decrease in negative emotions. A year later. And now they've done additional studies. They just did a 1-year study with 1,500 people. So you can appreciate this.
Is that right?
It's like a biggest study you can imagine, 750 in each group. And this one is on engagement in business and in life, because right now, since COVID, the engagement levels have gone through the floor. You're probably familiar with it. They have 3 measurements. One is, are you engaged? And engagement equals EBITDA or equals profit in companies. You can see a direct relationship,
definitely.
Right? Then there's those that are disengaged. That would be what people started calling quiet quitting, where they're doing the minimum they need to. And then there's actively disengaged, which is actually people who are angry and they're just trying to hurt the company when they stay there as well. Since COVID, the drop in engagement is the biggest drop in the history of any form of measurement around the world. In addition, the largest increase is in active disengagement. And so they did a group, and they haven't published it, it'll come out shortly, but I can give you the broad strokes of it that I'm excited about is they eliminated all of the disengagement that had been driven by 4 years of isolation in 6 days. And then the best part was, without any more interaction with me every month, they measured them for a year, they increased in their engagement.
Oh, really?
Because what's happened is now the hunger is awakened in them. They now have a sense of control over their own life. They've also done a study a separate one that they published in a different journal that I can get to you, which was about the teaching style, because what they wanted to figure out is how? How does this work? So I'll tell you what they uncovered. There's a separate group that had been working with them and had worked measuring my body on stage, because I do immersion events. I think 4 days, 15, 20,000 people in a stadium, 12, 13 hours a day. And when COVID happened and they shut everything down, I wanted to still help people. So I built a studio, because every stadium in the world was shut down. And I started doing it with people in their homes. So the first thing I did is during those first 3.5 years before COVID, they had been measuring me. So they had me wear this $75,000 device that measures everything. They take my saliva and my blood at every break. And they found a whole crazy set of statistics. Like, I burn 11,300 calories on stage in a day. I didn't think that was possible, but consistently, that's my average. Chess masters, Jordan, I guess, burn about 3,500 to 4,000 not moving. And so before I even get on stage, I burn about 3,500.